Hey everybody, Dr. Quinn here. I'm taking a look at the assignments for Module 6. You're about to start Module 6, and I'm going to go over this with you in this video. Module 6 is a bit of a lighter week for you. There's a lot of consideration and work that you have to do on that draft. You're going to get feedback from me within the next 7 days. It takes a lot longer to give feedback per drafts because it's just a much chunkier piece of text. And of course, professors, in my case, I have 100 or more students in a term. So just be patient while you wait for that feedback. But you can still think about how would you adapt. Say, for example, you're writing on the Palouse text, the stress at work text, and you chose your first audience that you submitted in a draft last week. Your first audience was teachers. Okay. Well, your job for week 7 is you're going to edit that text and save it. You're going to have 2 versions of it. Don't save over it, but like save a second version inside the first document. That's my recommendation. Because for week 7, you're actually going to edit the first version based on the feedback you'll eventually get from me. And then you're going to try your hand at rewriting it one more time, not from scratch, but editing it significantly to address the needs of your second audience that you had been talking about over the last couple of weeks. You were asked, especially in week 2, to highlight multiple audiences for the author and for yourself. Well, that's coming into play in week 7. So for Module 6, we're going to talk about adapting writing for multiple audiences, right? How do you refine your ideas of audience and identify them? Because if your audience shifts from teachers to students, elements of the text that you quoted for the teachers may not be the same elements you're going to quote for students. There may be different concerns. You may explain the text in different ways to show that concept mastery and that understanding of audience. So we're going to talk about adjusting future writing for different audiences, and that's what this week is going to be about. So Module 6 has a guide, and part of it is going to be sharing some of what you wrote in Essay 1 for your first audience from week 5, and sharing it in the discussion space and giving feedback to your peers. This allows you to sort of see level of effort, to see what your classmates are working on, how they approached writing for their first audience. And again, I will not be responding to every student this week, but I'll be peppering my responses and trying to make sure that I reach out to students this week that I did not reach out in the discussion in week 3. Okay. So you will be revisiting the audience and writing situation. How does the purpose change from writing about this article to teachers to writing about it for students, right? And we've got some key concepts here that you can go over. The course resources. We'll talk about introductions and conclusions, those framing elements for an essay. How do you warm a reader up in the introduction? That was something you worked on in week 4 and should be getting week 4 feedback from me as well. If you have submitted it late, it's due by Sunday night. Just keep that in mind. But what you worked on in week 4 was something you could carry into week 5. And you should be getting enough feedback on that to be able to modify it for the work that you do going forward. Okay. There are some critical reading strategies. How do you apply strategy of identifying a writer's purpose? Things we've done before, but it is just a reminder. Now, in week 6, the only gradable assignment, excuse me, is the peer reviews discussion. Again, you're not reviewing the entire text, but you're reviewing a section of it to get some early feedback from your peers while I work on giving feedback to everybody else. So this is a lighter week, but the work behind the scenes is that you are going to take a look at your essay that you wrote in week 5. You're going to think about how you modify it. I want to briefly show you what's coming up in week 7, just so you can see what this document will look like. So if we go to learning modules and we go all the way down to module 7, I'm going to show you the 7-1 project, and I'm going to show you the student exemplar. Okay, so I'm going to go into the APA one, and I want to show you what this looks like. So in week 7, at this point in week 7, you should have gotten feedback from me, and this is what a sample from a student would look like. And if you're doing APA papers, you have a cover page, right? Note as well, I need to make clear that I did not create the sample. The sample was created by upper administration. And what they're doing here at first may seem a little confusing, but let me clarify. So you'll notice a lot of bold in this document. The idea behind that is that the bold is SNHU's upper administration or your professor imagine a sample professor giving feedback to the student paper. My feedback when I give you feedback in the file tends to look like this, where I do it in bubble comments. But this feedback is just in bold. So when you're looking at the feedback in bold, you're seeing where the quote unquote class professor sample is providing feedback to the student and showing what the student did that aligned with the assignment rubric. That's that grading table. So you can see part 1 in week 7 reappears. This is what you wrote in week 5. This is that first draft for your first audience. You'll update it based on the feedback you get from me in week 6, and then you will resubmit it to show the changes that you've made. We're going from draft to final, right? And you'll notice that this is like it looks like it's a 3-page document, but it really isn't, because there's a lot of feedback in here. So maybe it's like a 2.5-page essay. So that's what you worked on week 5 that you edit based on feedback you get from me in week 6. Now, what's new week 7 is the second round of this essay, but that you're writing it now for a secondary audience. The first thing they ask you to do is to identify a new audience in like a paragraph. This is just a couple of sentences where you say, okay, the shift from this first audience, the first audience was professors or teachers, the second audience is students, just as an example. And then you say, how did you change the document to meet the needs of that second audience? So here's the second version. And you'll notice that if I put it side by side with this first version, it's not the exact same. The opening's a little bit different. Some of the examples are a little bit different, but some of it could be similar. That's fine. You don't have to rewrite it from scratch. But what you're doing in this class is you're practicing deep reading of an article, and you're practicing explaining it through essay writing to different readerships. So take your time and look at the student exemplar really closely. And you'll notice that the notes on the second version are just a little bit lighter. But you compare the two and you'll see it's talking about the same article, but it's a little bit different. And then, of course, at the very end, you just have a reference if you're doing APA style, or Works Cited if you're doing MLA style. So that's my notes for you on week 6, but a little bit of a look ahead to that student sample. Reach out if you want to work with me. I always recommend that students, if you want to work on an assignment, work before the due date, and especially before the weekend. Over the weekend, you may get an email back from me. But if you have questions and you want to work on a draft together before anything is graded, then all you have to do is reach out and we'll try to find a time where our schedules overlap. If you have any questions, let me know.